Hi class! In this video, I will be giving you a tutorial on how to build the Slideshow app. You can find all the information about the Slideshow app here on our Canvas page under the Slideshow app assignment. The purpose of the Slideshow app is to give you some more practice using conditional statements, which are the if, then, else statements, as well as using getters and setters. And this Slideshow app also uses a loop, which we learned about last Thursday. So let's go ahead and take a look at what the completed app looks like. As you can see, we have a few different visible components here. The first is a label that displays a name of the app. Next is a large image component that displays an image. Below that, we have another label that shows a number. This is the number. This number represents what number image we're on. And lastly, we have two different buttons. The first is a next button. When you click on the next button, the image changes to the next image, and the label showing the number reflects what number image you're on. As you keep going, the number increases and the image changes. I have 5 different images, and once you get to the end, it goes back to image number 1. And then the second button here is this random auto advance. When you click on the random auto advance, it uses a loop to display 5 random images in a row and then stops. So let's see that. Great. You saw in that little example that sometimes it'll choose the same image back to back, and that's completely fine. So let's get started building it. I'm going to go over to Thunkable. I'm going to create a new app. I'll call it Slideshow 2. Create. And let's start by getting all of our components in there. So we have one label, a second label down here, an image, and 2 buttons. So let's add those in. So we need 2 labels, two buttons, and 1 image, which you can find by scrolling down, and it's under the image section here. You can drag that in. Great. Let's go ahead and rearrange these components so they're in the right order. So we have the title, image, label, and then the 2 buttons below it. I know that sometimes when you're trying to move elements around when you're on the screen, it can be kind of hard to see where you're moving them. So I like to move my components, the order of them here in the app tree, because I think it's a little bit easier to see where they're going. Great. So let's start renaming our components. This first label is where the title is going to be displayed. So I'm going to call it title label. And I will put the title in there, which is Scenes of San Francisco. Next, we have the image. I'm just going to call it display image because that's where we're going to display our image. Next is the label we're going to show the number. So I'll call it counter label. I'm going to initialize the text to be 1. This next button is going to be the next button. So I'll call it next button, and I'll change the button text to say next. And then lastly is the auto advance button. So I'm going to call it auto advance button. And change its text to say random auto advance. Great. Let's go ahead and do some styling of our app. As always, you are more than welcome to style your app however you choose. I'll just show you how I did it for some inspiration. So if we look back at my completed app, I have a dark gray background on my screen. My text is white. My image is kind of big and has a border around it. The next button has black text with a white background around it, and then the random auto advance is just the white text with no background. So let's go ahead and do those changes. So I'll click on my screen here to change the background color. I'll make it a dark color, maybe like there. I'm going to change the text color of my title to be white. I'm actually going to make it a little bit smaller. Next, I'm going to make the image component a little bit bigger. I'll make its height like 300 and its width 200. Maybe the height is too much. Maybe I'll do 280. And then I'm going to give it some margin on the top and bottom so that it's not touching those labels too much. Next, I'm going to change my counter labels text color to white. And I'm going to change my next button to have the text color be dark gray. And the background color to be, I'm actually going to make it like really light gray. And I also want to make the border a square, and I can do that by changing the radius to 0. Lastly, the size is a little too big for me, so I'm just going to make it like 14. And then, I wanted to add a little bit of margin on my next button on the top and the bottom. So I'll give it like 10 and like 5 on the bottom. And then lastly, for the random auto advance button, I made the text color a light gray and the background color to transparent. And I'm going to bring down the font size a little bit on that one too. Okay, let's take a look at what it looks like. That looks good. You can't see the image yet because there is no image, but that looks pretty good. Let's go back to our edit. Next, we're going to upload the images that we want to display. As always, you are more than welcome to choose the images that you use. Get creative with it, make it your own. But I'm going to use these 5 images here. I've already named them, image 1 through 5. If you have not renamed your images already, you can click on the little pen here next to each one to rename them. Great. Lastly, for the designer side, when our user opens up the app, we want them to see the first image. So let's go ahead and initialize the display images picture to be image number 1. Preview that. That looks good. The last thing is that I had a little white border around my image. You can do that by going down here to border. I'll give it a width of 2 and the color white. And now you'll see it has a little border around it. That looks good. I just add a little bit more margin between the number and the next button. Okay, that's it for the designer side. So let's go ahead and start building out our blocks. So the first thing that I want to build is the next button. You'll notice that every time we hit the next button, we display the next image, and the number increases by 1. Because we just learned about lists, there is actually a better way to build this app using lists and variables and indexes that we hadn't learned when this app was introduced. So we're going to do it the original way using some conditional statements. And I want you to build this app using conditional statements, even though it's going to end up being a little clunky and seem a little bit crazy because we've already learned lists by now. But I think that this will give you some good practice on using conditional statements. So let's go ahead and start with our blocks. We know that we want something to happen when we hit our next button. Oh, I put net button. Let me change that. Next. Okay. Now the way that we can make this functionality happen with conditional statements is by checking to see what image is currently being displayed, and if it's being displayed, we'll show the next one. Essentially what we're going to say is if image number 1 is being displayed, then display image number 2. If 2 is being displayed, then show 3. If 3 is being displayed, then show 4. If 4 is being displayed, then show 5, etc. So let's go ahead and start doing that. It's going to be one long conditional statement. So let's go to our control panel and bring out an if, do, else statement. So we're going to be checking for multiple different conditions here. So I'm going to start bringing in a couple more else if statements. We're actually going to need that many. Okay. So we're going to say something like if the display images picture, we can get the getter here for the display images picture. And we want to say if it equals image number 1, then display image number 2. And we can do that by using one of these pink text boxes and just putting image1.jpg right there. So if the image display images picture equals image1.jpg, then we want to show the next image. So we want to set the display images picture to image 2. Additionally, we want to change the counter labels text to say 2. So now we're just essentially going to repeat that process for all the other images. So I'm going to copy this statement here. So the next thing we want to say is if the display picture equals image number 2, then we want to display image number 3 and change the counter labels text to 3. Great. We're going to repeat that process again. I'm going to say if the display picture equals image number 3, then we'll set the picture to image 4 and the count label to number 4. Okay, and we're going to continue on with that with the next image. So we'll say if the display images picture is image number 4, then we're going to set our picture to image number 5 and our counter label to the number 5. Last, the only condition that we haven't checked for is if the image's picture equals image number 5. So we can go ahead and put that information in the else statement. You could do this in two different ways. You could add another if-else block and do the same thing that we already have done, which would say image number 5 and then we'll set our picture back to image number 1 and set our counter back to 1. And then you wouldn't have this else statement at all. But in order to make our blocks just a little bit cleaner, we can actually get rid of this last if-else statement, just have an else, and put all this code into the else statement. And now there's no need for this extra conditional block. But you can do it either way. Okay, let's go ahead and go through this one more time. So when we click the next button, if the display images picture equals image number 1, then we're going to set it to the next picture. So we're going to set the display images picture to image number 2 and set the counter labels text to the number 2. Else, if the display image picture equals image number 2, then we'll set the picture to number 3 and the counter label to the number 3. Else, if the display image picture is image number 3, then we'll set the picture to image number 4 and the text to 4. Else, if the picture is image number 4, then we'll set the picture to image number 5 and the label to number 5. And then else, this is covering if the image is number 5, then we'll set the image back to number 1 and set the counter labels text to 1. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like. So we have the first image and number 1, hit next, 2 and the image number 2, 3 with image number 3, 4 with image number 4, and 5 with image number 5. And then we click next again, we go back to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, back to 1. Cool. That works great. So the next button is completed. So let's go ahead and get started on the advanced auto button, the auto advanced button. So what we want this button to do, let's look at the example again. Is when we click on it, we want to see 5 random images, and we want the count to increase by 1 every time. So you get 5 random images, and the number increases and it stops. So this is where we're going to use loops. So this is all going to happen when we click on the Auto Advanced button. So let's go ahead and grab that event handler. And we need this to happen to 5 times. So we're going to go to our control panel and grab our loop block here that says repeat X amount of times. Go ahead and grab that out. And we want to happen 5 times. And what we want to happen is to change the display image to a random one of our 5 images. We did a very similar, we've done things with random before. We chose from a random list. So let's go ahead and go over that. We are going to set the display images picture to a random item from a list. And this list is going to have 5 items in it. And those items are going to be the names of our images. So I'm just going to grab one of these. And I'm going to list all of my image files here. So now we have when the Auto Advanced button is clicked, 5 times we're going to set the display picture to a random image from a list of our 5 images. So let's go ahead. And the other thing that we want to update is our counter. So we are going to set our counter labels text to increase by 1 every single time. So we've done this before with our other counter app. So let's grab this, the addition block, and we're going to get the counter labels text and increase it by 1 every single time. So we're going to set the counter labels text to whatever the counter labels text currently is plus 1. And now to get this to the counter label to work properly, we want to set its text to 0 at the beginning, so that no matter where we are in our 5 images, the counter label will always say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, instead of saying something like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 or something. So we'll set it to 0 and then we'll increase it by 1 every single time. Great. Let's go ahead and take a look at what this looks like. We hit preview. And when I hit the random auto advance button, we just see it change 1 time. We want it to change 5 times, and we want to see every change happen. This is an issue when using loops sometimes, is that the computer is actually choosing an image 5 times and displaying a number 5 times, but it's going so fast that we can't see it and are only seeing the end result, the 5th result. So what we need to do is we need to make the program wait for a second between each image so we can see them being displayed. And we can do that really easily by going up to our control panel and grabbing one of these wait blocks. And we can just stick that at the bottom of our code here, still within the repeat block and within the click. And now, whenever we click on the auto advance button, we're going to set the counter label to 0 just to clear that out. And then 5 times, we're going to select display a random image from this list in our display images picture. And we'll increase the counter labels text by 1. And then our program is going to wait 1 second before it goes back and starts this repeat block all over again. So it'll do the random choosing again, increase the label by 1 again, and then wait for 1 second, and then go again. And that'll happen 5 times. So now we have some time to see the result of this random image being chosen and the counter text being changed. So now if we preview our app, and we click on the random auto advance, we'll see that change happen every 1 second. Three, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you notice that a few times there it chose the same image a couple times in a row. That's completely fine. That's just part of the randomness. And that's the end of the Slideshow app. As I mentioned, you will notice that the code for this app is a bit clunky and cumbersome, and it's a little bit tedious, especially with these if, else if statements. It can get really tedious, and that's intentional, to be honest with you. By now, we've all gone over the concept of lists and indexing, and this is mostly to show you that how useful lists and indexing can be in making our apps more easy to read, more easy to code, and have a lot less cumbersome repeated blocks of code. So we could have accomplished this in a much cleaner way by using a list of our images and selecting an index for each of the images. But this is good in giving us some practice on how to use conditional statements, and also does a great job of illustrating why lists and indexing can be so important and powerful in Thunkable. So great job on completing the Slideshow app. As always, to submit, just go to the project details page of your app by clicking on the 3 little dots, hitting the project details page. And then you can submit this URL. All right, thanks guys, have a good one.